Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is always a treat to be here, and I am especially delighted to have this opportunity to talk with Reid about artificial intelligence and the concept at the heart of your new book. Superagency, that is both the title of the book, but it's also, I think, a profound insight that Reid brings as he explores transformative technology like AI through a thoughtful and, I think it's fair to say, optimistic lens, right?
Yes.
Now, for those who haven't had a chance to read it since it was published today, I thought we should start by having you share your definition of superagency, and to do so, I'm told we have a special guest who can help.
Hello, everyone. Reid AI here. I'm Reid Hoffman's digital twin, and I'm so excited to be here today to celebrate the release of Superagency. So, Superagency is what happens when millions of people have all gotten access to a transformational, general-purpose technology. Historical examples of this include the steam engine, the automobile, the telephone, and the internet, which have gotten so integrated in our lives that we cannot imagine life without them. And superagency describes not only how we as individuals get these superpowers from technology, but also how we benefit from a society in which millions of others have these superpowers. And now, as we enter a new age of AI, we will experience a whole new era of superagency. This is the subject of Reid Hoffman and Greg Beato's new book, which, in my biased opinion, is a very insightful and worthwhile read. Back to you, Reid.
One thing I may have realized in watching Reid AI is I now deliberately change my voice around a little bit more, but you know, it's kind of oh, that looks a little strange sometimes.
Well, you know, Reid, this may be the first time for many of us to have seen an avatar like that. And first of all, how do you do it? And secondly, other than substituting for the second half of the book tour, what sort of cases, use cases, does something like this actually have in our lives?
So I didn't use any technology that actually isn't commercially available to everybody. I was trying to show this is the future, it's already here. One of my favorite science fiction authors, William Gibson, has a line, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And so part of the idea is to get people to be seeing it and engaging with it. And some of the ways that I've used it, in addition to subbing out for certain conference speaking and all the rest, and yes, this is the real me, holographic technology is not quite that good yet, nor is interactive. But like, for example, I gave a speech in Perugia, and the minute after I was finished, because I had prepared the speech, Reid AI gave it in Hindi, Chinese, Japanese. Like, we could have had this as easily delivered, you know, in choose your language. And that's a humanizing touch. You know, right now, it's not really interactive. It has to be scripted. So there's limitations in use given scripted. But as you get interactive, you can imagine such things as when you're when you call on the phone, actually, in fact, your AI avatar always answers and says, oh, you're trying to reach, you know, Hillary. It's like, yes, I'm Reid, and she knows me, and I have this thing I'm talking about. I said, well, how important is it? You know, what's it about? And then checks its thing and says, oh, she'll get back to you. You know, or, wait, I think actually she's interruptible, right? Hang on a moment. That's the kind of thing that you could imagine as kind of like more like many people kinds of cases.
Well, I love the idea that your speech could be immediately translated into all of those languages. You know, I know that you have a strong appreciation for history, and your history comes through in the early chapters of this book. Can you talk a little more about why you and your co-author chose to draw parallels between the last technological breakthroughs going back several hundreds of years and AI? I mean, it's a little bit, attention-grabbing when you're reading the book and you're making these analogies, because I think most people think of AI as being of a totally different dimension than some of the examples you use.
So part of what we wanted to bring people's attention to is that the dialogue that we're having that has the 85% of people being more AI concerned or skeptical or worried or any version of that versus 15% positive is actually not new. That when, for example, if you go back to the printing press, the dialogue around the printing press was actually, in fact, very similar to the dialogue around AI. It was things like, this will spread a lot of misinformation. This will destroy our institutions and our ability to discern truth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, this is true for, automobiles will cause a delay and breakup of families. Mainframe computers will enable, Big Brother Orwellian government. Like all of this stuff, all of which is collapses of human agency, collapses of human society. And so it is literally at this intensity each of the times. And it's important to note because part of the thing we tend to do as human beings, and there's good reasons for this, is start with what could possibly go wrong. Oh, wait a minute, I don't want society to change. And so that could go wrong, and that could go wrong, and that could go wrong, and that can go wrong, and that can go wrong. And if you, for example, started any of these technologies with, you first had to have nothing going wrong before it came out, we wouldn't have electricity, we wouldn't have a printing press, we wouldn't have automobiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's part of the reason why I'd say, look, these is always the natural part. Now, one can argue that, okay, there's things that make this particular one different. Each one was different at its time, and you have to kind of go through those, but you need to kind of start be thinking about like all right, I do have, as a very natural, considered human being, a visceral like, whoa, that's like a big change, and I'm not sure. That is how we roll as human beings. And this is actually one of the things that we covered only very lightly in the book, and probably will cover a little bit more, but part of the thing that we as human beings is that we handle transitions badly. Like take the printing press. The printing press, we don't have anything of our modern society. We don't have medicine, we don't have science, we don't have education in the ways that we do. We don't have a middle class without the printing press. How was the human response to the introduction of the printing press? Nearly a century of religious war. So part of the thing that we need to do is say, how do we navigate these transition periods with more grace and more humanity? And part of that is, I think, thinking about what could possibly go right.
I want to get back to that, but I also want to assume that many people, if not nearly everybody in this room, whether they are AI experts, optimists, pessimists, or hobbyists, have had some exposure to ChatGPT. And you have a history with that as well. Can you tell us about the significance of its release in November of 2022? You describe that in the book as the shift into, and I quote you, an era in which AI can work for you and with you instead of just on you. I thought that was really interesting. What do you mean by that? And give us some background.
So there were, in fact, have been a lot of AI technologies prior to the ChatGPT moment. The way that many of us experience them is not necessarily in sinister ways. People, worry about what it means for ad targeting and that kind of thing, but it's also in search indices and various other things in terms of how it participates in the background, being directed towards you versus necessarily at your direction. The thing that ChatGPT brought out was, oh, here is AI technology in a way that it follows what you ask it to do, what you're prompting it to do, and you begin to get some sense of how it could be for you. Because as opposed to, and obviously, search is for you, but, kind of like which search results come out of the, trillion token index, et cetera, is something that you are imagining that's doing a good job of, but you don't necessarily know. The question is, like, this becomes something that can be, oh, I could see how this can help me. I can see how this might give me some superpowers. And it could be from simple superpowers, like these are the ingredients I have in my fridge, what can I make for dinner, to more complicated ones. Like, for example, it's like, well, I'm trying to figure out this problem at work, or how to have this conversation that's difficult, or how do I, like, I've got this pet with this following medical condition. Should I drive an hour to the vet and try to get in after hours and so forth, and what's the kind of thing, and it can be helpful across this entire range. And part of it is one of the things that we argue for as part of the case for optimism, being bloomers, as was earlier kind of talked about, and is to say you don't expect perfection from the beginning. What you do is iterative deployment and development, right? And this kind of is, you put it out there, like you have the car, you have it start driving. And then as you drive, you go, oh, we need bumpers. Oh, well, we should have seat belts. Oh, they're not doing seat belts, and even though we really need them, okay, we have regulation for seat belts. And it's that kind of iterative process that allows humanity to be in the conversation or in the chat with the technology that helps us essentially kind of say, okay, these things are really good, these things are less good, here's how we iterate and how we drive down the road to the future.
Well, the idea of sort of iterative learning and then applying it to how you use AI makes a lot of sense. And it is absolutely fair to look back in history and say, that is what happened. Your example of the automobile. I mean, those early automobiles broke down a lot. They killed a lot of people. And then over time, people learned, and they were able to make changes in car design and in safety features. They put on speed limits, things that made sense after you'd had the experience. But I also want to ask you, do you think there's anything about this technology that would make it harder to kind of make those decisions based on iterative knowledge and experience? Because the environment in which they are being deployed has changed so much. I mean, it's very hard to make collective decisions. And so the individual benefits that you described about everything from something simple to something complex, you can see, but if you look at the aggregate, is it going to be more difficult given our political and social and economic environment to say, hey, wait a minute, we've learned enough that maybe we should put on this guardrail. Maybe this should be a certain standard we try to meet.
So there's a couple of important parts to your question. So one is, what are things that where, the cat gets out of the bag and that's just a problem and you can't, recontain it, so for example, things that have to do with very bad actions from rogue states, terrorists, cyber criminals, et cetera, those are part of the things, and that's one of the reasons why there's a really active debate within the tech community about what is, I think, frequently misnamed as open source models, because actually it's open weight models, because open source has other different features. I was on the board of Mozilla for 11 years. I actually am a big supporter of open source in various ways. But putting open weight models out and being cautious about them, because once they're there.
Can you describe what open weight is?
So it's like, DeepSeek, which I'm sure we'll get to, came out recently, but Llama and other things, which is basically anyone can get a copy of the model and then run it and modify it on their own, servers, computers. And so there's various things you can do with those, including if any of you've noticed increasingly sophisticated phishing attacks, that's probably being driven by one or more open source models that are essentially powering a more specific kind of, oh, it's your aunt who's out of money at the gas station, please help, blah, 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 whatever the particular thing might be. And so that's part of the reason why to be careful about those, because that's in kind of Tech Valley parlance, that's a one-way door versus a two-way door. So you have to be careful at that. That's one set of areas. There's also kind of questions, and one of the things that every company that I'm part of and have any association with whatsoever participates in these kind of group red teaming questions. So they think about, like, well, what happens if you gave, kind of like if certain kinds of characteristics started becoming true of these models, like they had a very fast self-improvement loop that could happen without a kind of human oversight. All right, let's make sure we don't do that. Let's make sure, and then sharing the kind of like, how do you think to prevent that? How do you think to test for it? What are the things you do? So there is actually a bunch of stuff that's actually trying to take the, kind of the highly dangerous, or potentially dangerous in some cases, things and say, okay, let's really watch for those. And there's a whole stack of them. And being in some of those conversations is a little bit funny because it feels a little science fiction-y, because it's like, well, then the exponential curve just goes up and we've created a super intelligence that can invent fusion. And you're like, okay, that could be good, right? And so anyway, there's a whole stack of stuff in that. And I think those things are all worth really paying attention to. I do think that one of the problems with the science fiction discourse, generally speaking, getting into the general public discourse, like, so for example, it's usually around this thing called existential risk or X risk, which I'm happy to go into because I think that's important to think the right way about that. And that, I think, somewhat obscures what I think the real issues are, which is, AIs give us superpowers. It also gives bad people superpowers, rogue states, terrorists, criminals, et cetera. And so let's really focus on that. Now, the very last point of your question is, it's clear, I think, around the world, not just here, that democracies certainly are in turmoil of various sorts. And so our ability to coherently and collectively make a decision is not at a particularly strong point. And so, but that problem is like, well, it is what it is. And sometimes democracies are stronger and sometimes they're not. But, apropos DeepSeek and everything else, I think that what we're seeing here is the cognitive industrial revolution. And it has the same importance for societies that the industrial revolution did, which is what will be the prosperity of our society, what will be our capabilities of our society, and how will our societies measure up against each other. And the ones that embraced the Industrial Revolution, part of the reason why we spend some pages on this, on the Luddites, right, and why it was important the Luddites actually didn't win their effort, is part of what made the, places like England have a long, very prosperous, globally relevant society. And I think that's important. And so the natural impulse, when you combine the kind of fear and uncertainty and the, hey, we don't know how to put these risks together, is to say, let's slow way down. And then it's like, well, but then we won't be the people to determine the AI future. And one of the things that I want very badly is I want AI to be American intelligence.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to get back to that, but I want to have you specify that you describe 4 camps that people generally fit into when it comes to their stance on AI and the surrounding discourse, some of which we've begun to discuss. And I find it really interesting because the first is doomers. Doomers are prepared for an inevitable AI apocalypse. They are the extinction people, the people.
Robots are coming.
Yeah, that's right, the modern day Luddites. The gloomers, who are cautious, but more level-headed than the doomers, and they advocate for strict guardrails around development and deployment. Then there are the zoomers, who are the anti-regulation, move fast and break things bunch. And then the bloomers, of which you consider yourself to be one, optimists who favor an open source, learn as you go approach, the iterative kind of learning you were referencing. So where'd you come up with those categories, and how did you decide to place yourself among the bloomers?
Well, so first, I wasn't actually, in fact, name calling. The doomers actually do call themselves doomers, just for people to be aware. And there's a phrase in the group in that community called P-doom, which is probability of doom. A little reference the earlier somewhat odd conversations that you have, and so I was looking at this and kind of looking at all the different dialogue that was going on, and I said, okay, these are kind of the camps, and it was actually Greg who came up with the labels, because he's very clever and smart, and he was like, this is, and I was like, okay, yes, that's right, and like, wow, are we going to be name calling? Oh, no, they call themselves doomers. Okay, fine. Right, like the word they choose. Now, part of bloomers is acceleration, in terms of let's travel down the road as fast and as safely as we can to get there. It's a little bit like if you were going to drive from here to Philadelphia or DC, you wouldn't go, let's go 2 miles an hour. You're like, oh God, right? You go, okay, but like, by the way, when we get to the curve, let's not run the stoplight, et cetera, et cetera. So let's do it in an intelligent, risk management, thoughtful way as we're going. And that's essentially what the bloomers are. Now, I'm curious, I think I have a guess, but I haven't asked you this question. Where would you locate yourself?
Well, I'm a boomer. I think I'm a boomer who is somewhere between a gloomer and a bloomer. Because on the one hand, I really appreciate the optimism. I find that very attractive. And I like the idea that we should be a learning organism. We should learn as we do, learn as we go, make adjustments, Although I do worry about all the people who, don't see the curve and drive off into the, over the cliff. How many of those can we actually put up with? And so I'm maybe a little more on the side of, okay, we know a lot now. We don't know anywhere near what we're going to know, and maybe there are some kinds of guardrails that we would want without losing the optimism, because like you, I want, this country to dominate AI. We invented it, built on a lot of work that people like you and others have done over time. And I do worry that if we don't have an optimistic kind of, full speed ahead approach to it, that we will get outmaneuvered, that we will find ourselves in a subordinate position, and that subordinate position could be one of great risk and potential danger. So kind of going from there, all the talk of the last couple of days has been about DeepSeek. And DeepSeek, which is a new, I guess, form of chat, I guess you would have to say, that was allegedly invented in China by a guy who owns a hedge fund who says he only spent $6 million to do it. Something about that does not strike me as particularly reliable. But we're going to see a lot of that. So give us your insight into DeepSeek, but even more importantly, where do we stand in this competition? What do we need to do in order to try to maintain a dominant position? Because even with all of our problems in this country, of which, we could go on and on, which I won't. I've done that on this stage before. I won't do it to you tonight. But I still would rather have us struggling to try to make the right decisions than ceding ground to rogue states, to highly organized states, to criminal organizations, to rogue technologists. So give us your view on DeepSeek, but more importantly, kind of what is the state of play and competition right now?
So I've done a little bit of research on the DeepSeek side. I have not done enough to speak completely authoritatively, but I do think that the pieces in the press story don't fully add up. So there's pieces that certainly are missing. The pieces could be that it was actually intensively using large models in order to train, ChatGPT, Llama, other kinds of things as ways of operating. It could be that it actually had access to a very expensive computer, and that the claim of $6 million was the last compute run. But that's there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't really add up. I think it was and is a very good piece of work. I think one of the things that we should all take away from it is part of what I've helped participate in the last couple of years has been going around saying, look, this is actually in fact an intense technological competition, to which I sometimes get the kind of skepticism of, oh, you're just saying the Chinese are coming because you want us to not regulate you or something like that. And I was like, no, this is an intense competition. I think this demonstrates that in a very compelling way. Now, that being said, like some of the illusory dialogue that's going on right now is like, well, scale compute doesn't matter. And it's like, no. The whole point of this stuff is like, even if you can train this model at, call it this level, like 1,000, GPUs, if it's like 50% better when you train it with 10,000 GPUs, because that's that scale thing, when you get that better factor, that matters in some things. That matters in a coding agent, that matters in a medical agent, that matters in a tutor, that matters in, et cetera, et cetera. Because even when you say, well, including if you're spending like, $50 billion on it, it's like, yes, there's billions of people connected to the internet. If you said, my product is being used by 1 billion people per year, and I spent that much building a computer to do that, and it's better by 50% on these things that matter, and you say, well, how much does it matter? It's like, well, how much do you pay a lawyer per hour? Like, if you're making them 50% better in the way that it's operating, that's a lot. That's still worth doing the scale compute. And so the whole kind of last couple days of, oh, maybe scale compute doesn't matter, is an illusion. And it's one of the reasons why I actually think the CHIPS Act and everything else is still smart and good policy relative to, look, it's not meant to prevent, it's meant to slow down and have a gap relative to these things. And so that's, I think, some of the takeaways from DeepSeek. I'll pause before I answer the other part of the question, because I'm also curious your analysis on this.
Well, as you were talking, Reid, I was thinking that it seems highly likely that the company that produced DeepSeek was backed up by other significant resources, including probably state resources. The thing about competing against China is they don't have a free market. And when I was senator and I would talk to companies that were doing a lot of business, even when I was Secretary of State, it wasn't long before those businesses who had invested in China, brought their products and their services to China, suddenly got the knock on the door saying, hey, we want you to meet your new partner. We want you to meet, the company that you're going to share your IP with. That set of behaviors has not disappeared. And so part of what I see is that most likely this is among the very clear state goals that China has set for itself, because AI not only has the benefit of having access to a power that can tell you what to do with the ingredients in your refrigerator, but also waging war, waging economic competition, controlling populations. So maybe he spent $6 million on top of a huge state investment. The second thing I would say is that it is really frustrating to me, as I know it is to you, we've talked about these things, to have our country unable to stay focused on the future. And I think the CHIPS Act, I think the Inflation Reduction Act were really down payments on the kind of future that we're trying to create for our country and continue to be the leader in the world. And, we've got to have more staying power, longer attention spans. We've got to get over ourselves in order to be effective in this competition.
Amen. So completely agree. And then the second part of your question, which is what are the things we should be doing? We have essentially national treasures both on the level of these hyperscaler companies, which are too often kind of described as just kind of only having villainous intentions, and it's like no, there's actually all kinds of things that they do in providing what are like really great services, and it isn't just things like either Google Maps or Translate or the kinds of things that Microsoft and others provide to government and all the rest of these things. There's a stack of those things, but we have AI capability both there amongst multiple of these hyperscaler companies having like just amazing talent, IP, drive, hard work. We want to enable the whole group there. And then we have an amazing number of startups, right? Not just, Inflection and Manus, which kind of the little engines that I try to help with. But I think we want a kind of a full court press, and part of that is, what are the ways that we get to making that, kind of more realized as a America leading, function. And we have some advantages, like these companies and entrepreneurial environment, although there is also a very entrepreneurial environment in China. And we have some areas where we have some deficiencies. The onshore manufacturing of chips, the ability to have, essentially to very quickly be able to do all the work to get good, clean, large data centers with clean energy and all the rest. That's an important part. There's a whole stack of things that I think need to happen here as part of the infrastructure for this. But it's basically like try to accelerate the compelling players that we have, and the fact that we are certainly amongst the leaders in entrepreneurship. And again, a little caveat to China, which is an intense thing, is the only place I've gone outside of Silicon Valley where I sometimes go, oh shit, we're moving too slowly, is China, right? I mean, one of the things when I used to travel around everywhere in the world from Silicon Valley, it was like, oh, this moves a lot slower than we move. And part of like having written blitzscaling, the game for winning the technology kind of standards, platforms, companies, scale companies of the future is always in part a speed game. And so you have to win that speed game. And it's one of the reasons why I actually spent several visits in China trying to learn what are the things that they could do that we could also then learn from to bring back to Silicon Valley to say, hey, here's some of the things they've learned, let's do this too. Right?
Well, it used to be that we would say, we remained the intellectual leaders, we remained the inventors, the creators, but they were really good at, taking what we've invented and then, going from there and creating industries out of it. And that a lot of what we used to do, like chip making, for example, or solar panels, things like that, migrated there. And it wasn't just because of, wages and other conditions in our economy compared to theirs. It was because that's how they were organized. We were really organized to create things, and they were organized to replicate and learn from replication. And I think one of the perhaps epiphanies now is that they've gotten creative. They have gotten creative. They have had enough practice, which is kind of your argument in Superagency in a way. They've iterated and iterated based on what somebody else created enough so that they have learned from that, and that has sparked, their own innovative capacity. And so we are in a competition now that wasn't real. I mean, in the past, it wasn't real. yeah, we lost manufacturing jobs, we did that, but we never lost our competitive edge. Now, what I hear you saying is that we perhaps could if we're not careful.
Yes. We're in the game strongly, but it's much closer, right? And I think that part of it is that we want to be doing everything we can to, here's one of the things. We should always be learning. This is one of the things that I love about Silicon Valley is it's a constant learning machine, including learning from its previous failures. And so it's like, okay, we learn from other people all the time. But, of course, the way that we can get back to our competitive edge is by playing to our strengths, by being more American. It's not by trying to kind of out-compete Chinese the way that they're doing, whether it's subsidizing markets in intense ways, other kinds of things, state policy in certain things. That's not we do it by the American entrepreneurial networks and the creativity. But we have to go at that, and we have to be saying, that's what we want.
Well, on your podcast, Possible, you recently interviewed Dr. Fei-Fei Li, who's just an extraordinary person, an obvious technologist, Stanford professor, who's known as the godmother of AI. And she pointed out what she sees as a public communication flaw in the way we talk about AI with language like AI will cure cancer or AI will solve climate change. Can you speak to that? And do you agree with Fei-Fei? And what was she really trying to communicate herself about how we need to not only think differently about AI, but talk about it differently?
Fei-Fei's awesome. Partially because of Fei-Fei, the chair of the advisory council for Stanford's Human-Centered AI Institute, which she co-founded and co-director of. I think I think Fei-Fei's overall arc was to talk about it something as a human endeavor, which is not only we're not just trying to create these kind of alien robots. She also is very much not a doomer. What we're trying to do is create these things that greatly improve human life and are focused on human design in certain ways. And I think what she's trying to do is get away from a little bit of the science fiction talk and a little bit more towards, no, this is for us in our everyday lives, and the kind of stuff that she's doing with her spatial intelligence work now and all the rest of it, because it's like, hey, how do we have robots that can help in hospitals and other kinds of things as part of this. Now, the funny thing is I'll have to go back to her on this because she knew that I was working on Manus, but it's like, no.
Tell people what Manus is, because this is very exciting.
So Siddhartha Mukherjee, who is a local Columbia, professor, and I had decided about 18 months ago, maybe a little longer, I went to my partners at Greylock and I said, look, I think there's going to be a ton of very interesting, great investments in coding assistants, productivity things, work companies, security stuff, a bunch of that stuff. I'll help with all of that. I don't think that people are really fully generalizing from the fact that these are, what does it mean that it's an amazing language capable, kind of amplification intelligence? Because yes, all those things, but what else? I was like, well, I tend to think that if you knew how to do the AI stuff together with the various bio and pharma stuff the right way, there might be some amazing unlocks here. So the way that I operate, and I said this is what I'm going to go look at, the way that I operate is I immediately start going around talking to the smartest people I know, asking them what they think. Had a number of dinners here in New York with, Sid. And one of the things that was really funny is I hadn't really appreciated that Sid had such an amazing track record as an entrepreneur. Obviously, Emperor of All Maladies, amazing professor, amazing research in oncology. And so at dinner 3, Sid comes to me and says, I've done entrepreneurial work. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. He It's like, yeah, and by the way, with what you've been talking about with AI and the things that I know, I think we could do something here, right? And I was like, oh, let's talk about it. And so basically, Sid walked me through the entire process of ideation to, clinical testing, to deployment of drugs. And we looked at each part of it and said, where could AI make a 10x difference? Let's apply AI in those areas. Not do the kind of standard, almost Silicon Valley thing, which is, oh, we'll just do all the research. It'll do everything in silicon. It'll just be all simulated. Biology is too complicated for that. How do we do all of that? And then we went, well, we think we got something. Let's go. And that's the entrepreneurial impulse.
And as I understand it, you're going to be working with Sid, who is at Columbia Presbyterian. If you've read Emperor of All Maladies, you know what a great writer he is, as well as a scientist, physician, to really focus in on breast cancer, prostate cancer, to really try to use AI to help people with, Sid's background to understand how to attack it. And I think that's what Fei was really saying, is that it's not AI that's going to help us solve breast cancer. It's human beings with a deep understanding and knowledge of biology, oncology, et cetera, who are going to be able to harness AI. And that's the optimistic view about how this can work. And I want to stay on this because you're very hopeful about the positive applications, but let's talk a little bit about the downsides. And among those downsides, certainly AI is going to take away jobs. AI is going to replace certain kinds of human work. Just as previous technologies, the horse and buggy people were eventually put out of business.
Apparently some of them still work here in New York.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, we like to keep them around. But how then, in your thinking, do you reconcile the potential progress with the more negative impacts? And are there ways to try to preempt or plan for that? Because, when you think about the automobile model, right? The automobile was in itself an incredible invention, but what really set it off was Henry Ford deciding that he was going to produce cars that working people could buy. And in effect was one of the drivers of the creation of the American middle class. Or when you talk about the Industrial Revolution, starting in the UK and getting people into factories, which was brutal and hard work, but getting them off of farms, getting them off of subsistence farming, creating opportunities for the second generation of the textile workers to, send their kids to school and create a middle class. I do wonder whether that is the likely scenario here, because in our society of such extreme inequality in wealth, and how people who are already well-educated, more technologically inclined, are going to really benefit, not just as developers, innovators, but as users of this new technology. And the job loss and the kind of fears and anxieties that go along with that, which have then, after effects on politics and other impacts. How do you reconcile that? How do we think about that? Or is it just like, look, that's the way life is? I mean, obviously, the automobiles displaced workers, steam engines did, printing presses did. They also created more jobs. But is there a lot of job creation that is going to come out of these applications for AI?
So I think there's 3 parts that I should answer this question. And the first is, I really don't want to underplay in any of these technology transformations, including this one, the difficulty of the transition. The transition will be difficult. Part of the reason to try to say the kind of optimistic message, to focus on what could go right and so forth, is to try to, not to make the transition, like floating down a stream on a summer's day, but actually to navigate a difficult transition somewhat more gracefully, somewhat more with humanity and so forth, and as much as we can. So one is there will be difficulty. Second thing, on the jobs, kind of issue, I think there will be jobs that are, essentially completely taken over by AI. I think like customer service in bulk will be this, because any place where you have a human being who's trying to approximate running a script, an AI can run the script better. So suppose though I pull up menu X and I say, such and such to a person who's calling in about this, AI will be actually a better experience for the human who's calling in, let alone all the rest of the things in terms of how this operates. Now, I do think that a lot of jobs will be displaced to a human from a human using an AI, and that gives a little bit of a lens of the kinds of things that I think we want to be trying to nudge our way to. And it's another reason why I wrote this book, because I want everyone focused on how do we be maximizing this virtue of human agency as we're kind of going. And so it's like, well, what if we had AIs that help you learn the new, kind of AI skill or ways to do that? If this particular job, say you were good at marketing, but you're not good at marketing with the AI stuff, what other kinds of things could the AI help you find those jobs? This kind of thing. Could AI help deliver government services much better to help with transitions? All of this kind of thing I think is really important to do, and we should be nudging in those directions, once again, to make the transition, more graceful. I don't think it will be graceful. I just think it could be. We've learned from the Industrial Revolution, as opposed to just saying it's going to be brutal, suck it up. It's like, okay. Now, the very last kind of point that I think is useful for people to track is, like, our society always has lots of, people who have more powerful, privileged, wealthy positions and not others. It's replete through everywhere in society. This person got this job, these other people didn't. This person got into this college, these other people didn't. The whole set of things. That's how society runs. We do want as much massive equality of opportunity as we can, to have talent discover the right places that it should be going. But one of the things that when it gets to technology, there's an interesting, not very well kind of noticed kind of fact on these things, which is when the tech companies are building products for hundreds of millions plus people, it ends up being the same product for everybody. So, for example, the iPhone that Tim Cook has is the same iPhone that the Uber driver has, right? So it doesn't mean that there aren't still other resources that have a differential thing. But that's already one of the things that we're seeing in some of the AI development already. It's part of the ChatGPT moment. It's the reason why we open the first substantive chapter with this as a dialogue. And I think that's at least a hopeful lens on the kind of equality moment. And one of the things that we here in Western democracies frequently miss, and I try to spend time talking to all of us, but I also try to spend time talking to other agglomerations of people from countries too. The global South's not going, oh, we're fearful of AI. They're like, please include us, right? Like, don't just do it and leave us behind. You're gonna have a medical assistant on every phone? Us too, please, right? And so I think that's the kind of really important thing, is to get that kind of a little bit like smartphones. And like one of the facts that I was told recently, and was told this, so I'm not fully warranting it, but it might be that 3/4 of the people have mobile phones on this planet. And it's not smartphones necessarily, but like, well, if you have a mobile phone, you can have access to AI. Yeah. I mean, just audio interfaces and so on. So it's like, it is in fact, kind of very doable to kind of get it out there. And so that's how I'd go across the arc of the question.
Well, that is a good segue into the first audience question here. As AI develops rapidly, often outpacing regulations and safeguards, what immediate steps should tech leaders and policymakers take to prevent misuse, such as bias and misinformation, while also fostering responsible innovation?
So, I think it's, one, all the tech leaders I work with have safety groups in their companies. They're spending a bunch of time on these questions, included, biases, misinformation, other things. My general thing when it gets into policymakers is to say, hey, be applying, kind of questions, pressure to say, hey, are you analyzing the bias in these things? Hey, are you tracking possible misuses? But the only places to really kind of push hard to intervene are things that are large errors versus small areas that you can learn and fix, right? So if you get something that says, like one of the, since we're in New York, when I was, a person I was close to was telling me about the Kevin Roose story of, the Microsoft agent Sydney, kind of after 3 hours of discussion, getting to telling him that he loved the AI agent more than he loved his wife, and that, and that was the case, and said, Reid, why are you laughing? I'm like, if that's the problem, we're fine. We're fine. That's an easily fixable problem in the future. That's not a problem that I'm worried about.
Okay, well, how do you fix that problem? If some guy tells you, I love my, chat persona better than I love you. How do you fix that, Reid?
Well, but, I have to tell you about pi and inflection. No. Look, anything that gets to millions of people always has some weirdness, right? I mean, the most dangerous thing that most people do here is get on the highway, right? And so it's like there is a baseline set of things happen. And so the attempt to hold any kind of large system thing, especially innovation thing, to zero error is an attempt to stop the future, right? Now, the way that you do that sort of thing is you say you have a lot of ongoing learnings, like, for example, they're kind of analyzing okay, what goes into these chats and what's happening. Is something good happening? Great. If something bad happening, how did it get there? Can we stop it, for the next thing, et cetera? And that's part of how you do that. And so, for example, if you went to Inflections Pi and said, hey, you're my best friend. This is AI agent, PI, pi, pun intended. And you said, you're my best friend. You'd say, oh, no, I'm your AI companion. Let's talk about your friends. Have you seen them recently? Is there someone you want to see? Et cetera, because with just the right kind of design nudges, and this is, again, part of the reason why I'm very optimistic about these things. And when people say, well, what happens, are we going to be more lonely because we're going to be talking to AIs? Well, I think we should ask and cajole and nudge, and I think Pi has already, caused other, model developers to also go, oh, that's good, we'll do parts of that too, to then be that more human-center-oriented. And I think that could then lead to, as opposed to being a challenge, being a virtue. Because for example, part of how we learn to be good with each other is by having, kind interactions. And if basically you said, hey, we love it when all these AI agents are fundamentally kind in their interactions, that's kind of how we learn as human beings. And now, by the way, that won't make everyone kind, right? That's not the way it works for humanity.
I've got a few people you should send those to.
Yes.
I've already got them on Inflections Pi. Here is another question from the audience. What would you recommend a college student study today, and what field would you recommend a 20-something pursue to guard against AI-driven job loss?
So I do think, like a shadow of an earlier question, is I think we will be creating a whole bunch of new jobs with AI. I don't know what they are. It's obviously easy to say, well, AI trainer or other kinds of things, but I think there will be a set of new reconfiguration. Now, one of the things, my very first book was The Startup of You, which is how to be the entrepreneur of your own life. And I think that's, if anything, decade after decade, becoming more kind of relevant to how jobs work. And so part of the entrepreneurial mode of thinking is how do you convert potential disadvantages into advantages? And one of the things is that, well, I haven't interned in this area yet. I don't know, law, medicine, whatever the areas might be. But I do have a depth of expertise and ability to early adopt and know these AI things. And so part of the reason I was pushing back so hard on the very earliest responses from educational institutions of, oh, ban ChatGPT, as you know from Impromptu, the last book, was to say, no, you want young people to be using them. You want them to be able to come to the work experience and saying, hey, I have this experience with all this intelligent way of using these new tools, and I can help the workplace with it. And so in terms of areas of degree of study, it's certainly, kind of be learning, making sure you're in ongoing learning mode. Don't be kind of an industrial, like learn once, repeat for the rest of your life. It's kind of an ongoing learning experience and making sure that's part of it. But part of it's also, like for example, I got asked yesterday by there was kind of a women's engineering group down at Penn, and they said, well, okay, I'm learning computer science. Is that the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? It was like, well, actually, the patterns of thinking will still be very helpful, but don't overly identify your strength with, oh, I'm really good at writing code in this language, because the AIs will help you do that, but your thinking with them, your ability to bring what is frequently talked about as metacognition and kind of awareness into it, and being kind of more of a director or a manager of that process is the kinds of things. And so you get to, what are the kinds of things I would learn? It would be some humanities and like philosophy and stuff, to be thinking about the human condition, how to be more human, and then some kind of, how do I kind of orchestrate kind of a set of pattern across a set of agents that I can then, kind of lead and direct in a set of work.
Well, I think that trying to figure out how to plan for the future when the future is changing so fast by any definition is difficult. But what you said at the end about, have a well-rounded education and all of these very classical kinds of study areas, whether it be history, philosophy, whatever, we need people to do that, because managing AI is going to be a very big part of what people hopefully will be able to do in the future. And that brings me to the final audience question. In terms of war and peace, what can AI do to help promote peace? And what is the greatest danger that AI could bring about when it comes to global security and war?
Final question. Tolstoy had all of War and Peace to answer this question. So I'll start with the greatest danger relative to this particular question, which is, as you know, because this is an area where I learn a whole bunch from you, is, there's this classic area in kind of geopolitical thinking of offensive, defensive weapons, what it means. And one of the challenges with AI, like cyber tools and everything else, it's inherently a little bit more of an offensive weapon and has the tendency to say, use it or lose your advantage. And so that creates a destabilizing element. And that would probably be the thing that would be in the most worrisome category. And then on the optimistic side for peace, one of the things that I think, and this is again a little bit kind of why I wrote Superagency, I think that, part of, when people think that their future is likely to be better than their present in terms of building things, they tend to go to war less, right? And so can we use this kind of AI moment to try to bring that in leadership to most areas of the world? And, some of that's like, oh my gosh, I have this medical assistant now, and, previously I'd have to go for hours to go see the doctor, and I'm worried about my kid, and I can figure out now if there's anything I can do right away, if I should start taking the kid to the doctor right away, et cetera, and that being out there, and it's a microcosm of the story of the kind of thing, and I think that's the kind of thing that I would hope might lead to a more peaceful state.
Well, as you can tell, Reid has given so much thought to all of these very significant and challenging issues and questions over a lot of years. One of the things that I so admire about you is that you've done this and retained a very humanistic, centered approach to technology, and that's something that we need more of, and we should try to figure out ways to help to catalyze it and to help prevent, some of the people who have great skills and track records in technology from wanting to be using all of these various tools for domination as opposed to positive outcomes that can benefit everybody, not just themselves. Because I do think, like every piece of technology, it kind of comes down to what are the values of the people using it? The values of the people creating it, obviously, but then once it's been created, using it. And the war and peace question at the end certainly, I think, is going to be studied for a long time, because a lot of weapons of war are becoming more and more autonomous. And so we're going to see all kinds of very dangerous weapons in the hands of all kinds of people that may or may not have the values that they should to be entrusted with that kind of destruction. So, reading this book, whether you agree with everything in it or not, whether you are a doomer or a bloomer,
or a boomer,
or a boomer, gloomer, doomer, whatever you are, you have to start thinking about this because this is going to be part of our lives, whether we invited it or not. And it's really important that people have conversations like this because, yes, we have big work to do at the collective level and trying to figure out how to maximize the positive, minimize the negative. But even on the individual level, it's a great tool, as you've advocated, Reid, for students to learn, but when does it become a crutch, or when does it interfere with learning how to analyze yourself, whatever problem you're studying? So every one of us is going to have to be making a lot of decisions about the role that AI plays in our lives. So I hope everyone here tonight has walked away with some of the big questions, have certainly listened to Reid about a lot of the benefits, while we still appreciate that with any technology there are downsides. But I, for one, really appreciate your putting this very powerful, positive message out there, and then we can, judge against it, and we can use it as a kind of goal that we can get to by being smart about the path forward. So, Reid, do you want to close us out with any final words or call to action for the audience?
I'm tempted to show my age and say San Dimas High School football rules, but just to have it. But I guess this is what I strongly advocate and hope for everyone is that you move to being AI curious. It doesn't matter if you're also at the same time AI uncertain, AI skeptical, AI fearful. But add AI curious into it. Because as the Secretary mentioned, it is coming, right? And the question is to participate and think a little bit about the agency thing. So say you felt that when you summoned your Uber or your Waymo and got in and it was going where you wanted to go and all that this was an expression of your agency. That's a positive mindset. If you took the mindset of, oh my God, I'm in this random vehicle that's going somewhere and so forth, if you took that mindset, you would feel very unagentic. And so part of it is to have that being AI curious is part of having that proactive agency as a mindset. And I think that would be very important, not just for your happiness, but for your participation in the creation of the future.
Well, thank you so much, Reid Hoffman. Superagency.